Hello everyone. This is a different video this week, so it's not a newsletter, so any kind of updates in the newsletter will be in the main body of the newsletter. I'm at home with COVID at the moment, so I thought I would take the time to record the video that's kind of been rattling around in my head for a little bit. This video is about feedback and why there might not be any marking in your child's book whatsoever. So the first thing to say about feedback is that feedback is incredibly powerful. It is one of the most important things that we can do as teachers to make a difference to a child's future chances of learning things and learning things correctly. Teaching is not an evidence-led profession like, say, medicine is, and it has kind of aspirations to be there, and it's very much on a journey there. And now there are organisations set up to help make sense of the evidence existing in teaching, which is often disputed because the context of teaching is so different as well, because of cultural, social, demographics, all of that. So it's very difficult to control for all of these different factors. But essentially, there is an organisation called the EEF. It's one of many organisations, but it's a very big one. And they're called the Education Endowment Foundation. And what their job is to make recommendations for schools and teachers based on the availability of evidence as well. So the EEF will tell you that feedback is incredibly important. So should be utilised daily, should be utilised all the time, and they make those recommendations. However, they also report that written feedback holds no advantage whatsoever over verbal feedback. And that's a report, that's a conclusion from other organisations as well. The evidence is that traditional marking holds no advantage over verbal feedback. Now, that might sound strange to you, but it doesn't sound strange to me as a teacher. Now, most parents, if you ask your child, what did you do today? You don't get a big list of all of the things they learned that day. You really have to, for some children, it's blood from stone stuff, isn't it? And so when you think about kind of written feedback, and I'm going to call it intersessional feedback in a second, so in between your sessions. When you think about written feedback quite often operates in the same sort of way, except for it's even later. So let's say we were doing similes yesterday, and our written feedback is, can we say, can you improve this simile? So we've underlined a simile, can you improve that simile for me? And the child gets there, and first there's, what's a simile again? Because, I mean, a lot of children can't tell you what they had for lunch. So what's a simile again is quite a really common thing. And then, how do I improve a simile? What was the teacher saying about what was an appropriate simile? Let me give you an example. So an appropriate simile might be heavy as a stone. Okay, stones are heavy. Okay, I get it. But the child might have written as heavy as a red thing. So while that satisfies a simile, comparing something to something else, that it isn't, it doesn't satisfy the kind of the point of a simile as well, which is to kind of illustrate the features of that thing. So written feedback does have that significant drawback, which is children are really fallible, because humans are fallible, and because they're learning so much all the time, and because their days are so busy, and because they're so young as well. So sometimes this written feedback can be really, really ineffective, and that's an example of really ineffective written feedback. Our feedback policy is mostly based around what happens within the lesson. So one of the first things that happened when I got to Pilton Bloomcoat is I bought everyone really, really good visualizers. These are cameras that can drop down. They're quite bulky and metal and beautiful, really. And they autofocus on the work. And it means that we can get the work up in front of the class and we can correct that together. So the difference between 30 people, say, opening their books and all having kind of different advice or whatever, or even having very, very similar advice, which is often the case as well, is that we get one up in front of people and then we go, right, let's have a look at so-and-so simile. Let's see if we can improve it. Oh, let's have a look at so-and-so simile. It's fantastic. What makes it fantastic? So that's sessional feedback. That's the stuff that happens in the classroom, and that's the real battleground for teachers, which is hopefully, if you're asking your children, how do my teachers help me learn? How do they give me feedback? Hopefully they say, well, they get things up in front of the visualizer and they show us. Sometimes it's not other children's work, sometimes it's the teacher modelling, so it's the teacher writing a simile and then kind of explaining the principles about how they've made the choices they've made. Now, intersessional feedback, that thing I was talking about between sessions, happens differently. So attached to this video is our feedback policy, so you can look at this in a bit more detail. But intersessional feedback is, I think, one of the best things that we do, because intersessional feedback is generally quite poor, generally quite weak, because people forget. So what we do is each lesson, the EEF tells us that one of the most powerful things you can do is differentiate between what was an error and what was a mistake. So a mistake is something that you just didn't get it right for whatever reason. There are a million different reasons we know something and we don't get it right on that occasion. And so if someone makes a mistake, if we think they kind of know that, but I don't have enough proof to move them on to the next thing, we'll give them a very, very similar task at the beginning of the next lesson. Okay, so they might have an M in their book and they go, okay, right, so I've got an M, I look at the board, and at the beginning of every lesson, there'll be these codes. So I'm on the M task, right, I'm going to do an M, and the M says, right, I'm going to do something that's very, very similar. So I do that, and hopefully I get that right, if we've correctly identified that it's just a mistake. An error is something different. An error is something conceptual, which is they didn't understand. So they don't know how to independently solve, say, that calculation, write that simile. And so an error typically starts, so you get an E in your book, and at the beginning of the lesson, you have a look at the boards and it's got an E task, and quite often the teacher will direct the E task, which is, I'm going to talk you through this now, okay? So it didn't look like you actually understood how to solve this, so I'm going to do one now with you, and I'm going to explain that process. Now, let's say you don't make a mistake or an error. Let's say it's absolutely perfect. Now, within the session, we have these things called diving deepers. We do them across our subjects where we look to kind of stretch and deepen children's understanding. I think it's really important at this point to say that deepening understanding is about making children think harder about the same concepts, not necessarily moving them on to a different concept. So we ask searching questions to make them think harder. Let's take an example of, say, multiplying fractions together. Okay, so maybe I can multiply 3/4 by 7/8. Fantastic. So one of our diving deepers, so we've got the right answer, one of our diving deepers might be, can you draw it? Can you represent the process? And in that, we show the structure of the mathematics, which is a deeper and more important concept. So we're really, really secure on where we are, and then we can move a child forwards. So they might have a D in their book, which means deepening. So, okay, I've got everything right. So I'm going to now be made to think harder about this concept. Now, the EEF tells us that disentangling what's an error and what's a mistake is really important. But in writing's often more nuanced than what's an error and what's a mistake, and it's a craft and it's refinement. So what we then do is we go, right, okay, so on some occasions, let's say it's not grammar, because grammar can be right or wrong. Let's say we're trying to improve a piece of work. Now, you'll see green pen and purple pen in children's books across the school, and that's evidence that they've got that feedback, because they respond to diving deepers and they respond to our intersessional feedback in different colours. So that shows when that's happening. So let's say we've just done a big write and we've got lots and lots of stories. The teachers looked at all of those stories and they've pulled out the common threads. So one of the things that we might do is we might say, okay, so this is our whole class feedback. Loads of people made these spelling errors. So we make like a little list of these spelling errors and we go and correct those. Now, here's a piece of someone's work that absolutely captured what we were trying to do. Now let's have a look at that. Have a look at that in your own work as well. So we get that up in front of the visualizer and we help children understand where things have gone really, really well and where things need improvement as well. And that's always done really sensitively. So there's not a single child in the school that ever gets put under the pressure of, look at this person's work, isn't it duff? All right, that isn't how we would frame it. That isn't how we would work it at all as well. So I think our teachers are really, really skilled at framing that as well. So one of the things that I hope we're starting to kind of move towards is this idea that the children really understand this feedback policy as well, that they know their books are looked at every day. And by the way, if it takes 5 minutes to mark a book, So it's 150 minutes for a 30 class. So that's 2.5 hours, right? And then let's say it takes 5 minutes for the maths book and then the English book and everything like that. What happens is, if you have written feedback, it doesn't get looked at every day. It can't. You physically wouldn't have enough time as well. We'd lose teachers at an even quicker rate than we already do. So this ensures that the books are looked at every day and that there's an action taken going forwards, which means that because it's much, much quicker than writing in each of these books, there's an action taken forwards based on that child's performance at a previous task. And that's really, really vital as well. How is this kind of received by, say, bodies like Ofsted and everything like that? So we are in a trust of schools, which I hope you know. We're in Team Multi-Academy Trust. High Bickington got their Ofsted last term, as did Witheridge. I attended both of those Ofsteds, and both of those schools are using our feedback policy, which I brought over from Woolacombe, and I'll talk about Woolacombe in a second. Both Ofsted inspectors were very, very happy with our feedback policy. In fact, one Ofsted inspector called it genius, which was brilliant because it is a very, very manageable policy for us, which is absolutely fantastic because what it does is it frees teachers to make even better lessons and to think bigger about the curriculum as well. But it also ensures that every child's book is looked at every single day, which isn't the case in schools across the country. It just simply isn't. It isn't possible. And it is based on evidence, which is really important as well. Now, this is anecdote rather than evidence, but when I brought this in at Woolacombe School, when I joined Woolacombe School, the most recent data had been at national average, pretty much, just ever so slightly above national average. And in the 3 years where this feedback policy was in place, we got the best results in Devon over that 3 years as well. So, and I'm not saying, by the way, that the feedback policy is the cause of that. What I'm saying, it was no impediment to really, really highly successful learning and then doing all of the really fun things as well. Attached to this video is the marking policy, and you should see an example there also of our whole class feedback that we use for writing. But if you have any questions at all, please do message and let us know. And I thought this would be a useful time to talk you through it. Thank you.